Hello and welcome to another Front-End Engineering Explained. So this one kind of follows on from the last one I did on Penpot, where I mentioned that I'm going to make my website more presentable, and then the first step is to get stuff from Figma into Penpot, and then I mentioned a little bit about design tokens. So bad news and good news. So the bad news is it still needs quite a bit of work in Penpot. I would say the only design tokens you can use right now that you create inside Penpot that you then want to use outside of Penpot through the translation tools and stuff like that are the color tokens. Those are really the only ones. And in that it's a little limited also, but they are pretty useful. But everything else is not ready yet to use outside of it. And I'll show you why I say that. But I'll also show you what you can do with design tokens. So this one will be a little heavier on the design token side and using tooling. So I've experimented. So I've read over quite a bit of the design tokens specification. I've also tried different ways of authoring it. So all of it in JSON, but just kind of the schema, a couple of different ideas that I tried out. And I tried Style Dictionary, so the one from Amazon. And then I also tried Terrazzo, which I mentioned last time. Again, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Either way, I'm definitely still sticking with Terrazzo for a couple of reasons. One, for me, right now, it follows the standard the closest between those two tools. And then I had a really good experience last night with one of the maintainers, Drew, and we'll get into that in a second. So I think the first thing I want to show is, so what happens when you export your tokens from inside Penpot. So I had this, I think if you watch a previous video, you would know I had this one set called Foundation, and then I was going to add everything in there. I did that, and that's when I exported and started to try using the translation tools that I ran into problems. And now I've split it out into color, dimensions, and general. My hope was that when I use the export tool, it would only export the things that is checked. So for example, like I said, you know, the border radius stuff that I have and the stroke width stuff I have, and then here the spacing stuff I have. Those aren't useful outside of Penpot. They're useful inside Penpot, don't get me wrong. And as they implement more of the standard, these things will then become useful outside of Penpot. So right now they're totally useful here, and I'm still using them, as you can see. But I don't really, there's not much value in me exporting it because I can't use it with the translation tools right now. So my hope was essentially that if I did this and I did export, it would only export the color tokens. Unfortunately, it does not. This is new since I last refreshed essentially. So what this wants to do now is I can either do multiple files or single files. So that's new. Let me see, maybe they've fixed some stuff that wasn't right. Let me quickly see. Here we go. Nope, that's still colors, dimension. Okay, no, but let me try something out with dimensions. Edit token, no. Okay, so the UI here improved. So this is literally the first time I'm seeing this. But I'm just going to leave it as a single file and hit export. And this is going to give me tokens.json. I'll just replace the one I have there. And let me quickly go and grab the file and I'll stick it there. Okay, so this is the export. Now there's a duplication of color, of course, which is already in itself a problem. But let's ignore that. This would usually have said foundation at the top. So we're getting our hex and we're getting our type color. This is cool. This is great. This is fine. This is useful. This will work with our translation tools. Now here's where we start to run into some problems. Now we have this dimensions here, and then inside there we have scale and we have spacing. Now here I'm using the whole thing where I'm using a reference And the reference is to scale.factor. The problem is this is going to fail. And the reason it will fail is because it needs to be dimensions.scale.factor. The other problem is this multiplication that's happening here. This is not defined in the standard, and this only works in Penpot. So even if I fix this to be dimensions.scale.factor, it's still going to fail if I try to use it. And this is with both Style Dictionary and with Terrazzo. So this is not, I'm not sure, I haven't seen any discussions yet, but there's a lot going on, so I might easily have missed this. But I haven't seen a discussion about this idea yet. I still like the idea, but this is just incorrect. What it should be exporting is dimensions.scale.factor. I thought maybe it was just a fault on my end and I should have actually have typed it in there. But two things. One, of course, for me, it should then already have complained to me inside Penpot that this isn't the correct reference. But if I do then do dimensions.scale.factor inside Penpot, it actually then throws an error and says that it's an invalid reference. So this is therefore not usable. The other problem here is it uses a type called spacing. Now that is not a standard type. What this should be instead, if we go to the specification and we go into format, then what this should be instead is dimension. And dimension works with the value. And here's the really important part that's missing. Because right now, even if this worked, all we would have is, for example, 6 times 3. And so we would have 18, but then our medium token, so our dimension-spacing-medium, would have a value of 18, a unitless unit, which obviously is not what we want. We either want pixel or we want rem. And so the specification actually states that a value must have, so your value and your unit. So your dollar value needs to have two properties, value and unit, and they are both required. And this is great because this has been a problem with some of the earlier iterations where you would have to write your own script to add that afterwards. So this is pretty cool. But of course that is missing. And there's also no type spacing. So that is why this doesn't work. It has those 3, 4 problems in there. And the same deal happens down here. There's no type called border radius. Again, this should be a dimension. And so that way you can make this 40 pixels, or you can divide by 16 and make it rems. Then if we go further down, here we have stroke. So this is our stroke width. Again, that doesn't exist. And in fact, there is another composite type called border, which we will look at in a second, which is even more useful. And then this isn't part of the specification either, but that's not that big of a deal. I think it's here where it mentions that. No. Let me just see here. Is it additional types? Nope. Anyway, somewhere in here it says basically that design tools, or any tool really, can add additional properties or additional metadata that's useful to it. And then your translation tools, for example, will just ignore it. Let me just scroll to the top and see. Introduction, blah, 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 terminology. There we go. Additional metadata may be added by tools and design systems to extend the format as needed. So this isn't part of the standard, but that is fine because you can see here that this is used by Penpot, and you can see here's the thing, active set color, but it's still exporting all of the token sets. It's still exporting all of them. So okay, so that is the shortcomings of Penpot. The other shortcoming, of course, is that we can't specify fonts as a design token. For that, we have to go into assets, and we have to do it in here in this way. And so again, when you export your tokens, this isn't part of it. And there is actually in the standard, there is here it says font family and font. There we go, typography. So there is actually typography, and I will show you how we will use that. So Now let's jump over and let's move away from Penpot and let's look at just the standard and how you can actually use it. So you have two options here. So you can either have everything in one tokens.json file. Technically also, the naming of that file should be either .tokens or .tokens.json. I need to see if I can quickly find where it mentions that. Alias, composite, was it in file format? Here we go. There we go. So .tokens or .tokens.json. So foundation.tokens.json, for example. But because of how you configure these translation tools, that is not that big of a deal. But if you want to follow what the standard recommends, then we should technically rename this to, let's just do that. Let's do foundation.tokens.json. But I'll show you now why that doesn't really matter. So if we go into, so this is the Terrazzo config. And basically all I'm doing here is just a couple of basic things. And then here we're specifying all our tokens. And as you can see here, I have them in separate files. This is, again, not something the standard defines right now, but there is talk about the idea of being able to split your tokens into a bunch of separate JSON files instead of necessarily having to maintain one primary one. And then I'm using the CSS plugin, and I'm using this one utility thing, and I'll show you in a bit why that is. And that's basically it. I'm not setting up any linting yet, and I'm just saying where I want it to output the CSS in the end. Now, it's already here, but I'm going to go ahead and delete this. So we can see it's an empty CSS file. So you can see I'm not cheating. Okay, so that's all the config I needed. And here I'm pointing it to it. So of course here I can just point it to the full tokens file, which is foundation.tokens.json, and it'll be all good. But I want to look at the individual things. So again, here is our colors. This is pretty much how it would come out of Penpot. It will have those empty descriptions here as well, which is fine. I just deleted them because they're all empty, so they're not useful. Now, the one thing is this is in hex. Now you can actually specify, the color module has actually been built out quite a bit, and you can do quite a lot more with it. Let me just switch over here and then go into color. And there's a lot here. Like you have all these color spaces, sRGB, HSL, LCH, OKLab, OKLCH, display P3, all the things. And so that's one of the other things. So if we have a look down here, we actually have a color space, and then components, an alpha, and then an hex. So where I had the nice interaction with one of the maintainers of Terrazzo is I was trying to use HSL here. And basically how you would do that is, let me copy this hex value. So you would have that, and then you would have your color space, but it would be HSL. And then you have your components. And so let's just do here. So this would be alpha, which would be 1, and then x, which would be that. Why does it hate me? Is there no? There we go. And so this isn't exactly what you would do. You would do that, maybe 50 and maybe like 75. And so what components mean is each one of these represents one of this. So this is your hue, saturation, and your lightness. Now, right now there's a bug in Terrazzo. So what it will do is it will identify your color space as HSL, but then it doesn't pick up the components. So no matter what you put in here, it would always output your HSL, and then in your parentheses, it would say none, 0%, 100%. Always, no matter what. So, but I did file an issue. So if we go here, because Drew asked me to file an issue. So, whoa, has it already been fixed? can't believe that it would be. Let's quickly see me. There it is. Okay, so I found an issue here, and then this is Drew. So I'll have a look at his comment there. But essentially, like I said, I give it this, and this is what it outputs, and this is what I expected it to output. So super, like just like that. So that gives me even more confidence in the tool when the maintainers are so reactive to bugs and being willing to help and that kind of stuff. So technically you could do this, right? You can use a color space that's not just hex values, but that's HSL or any of those other color modes, color spaces that I showed. So, but let's switch back to just our hex values that we had before. Yes. Now, here's another thing. So here I'm using a reference to color neutral 90, which of course would then use this guy over here. But then this is something that's also not yet supported in Penpot, and that is the ability to define a gradient. But the specification does make affordance for it. And for example, you say type gradient. Now color is actually an entire object like this, but you can just reference one of the existing ones like this. So the syntax is really easy. And you're basically saying position 0 to 1, and we'll see what this produces in a second. So that's all our colors. And we'll look a little bit more at that in a second. Here's typography. So this is something you can't get out of Penpot right now. So I just hand-coded these. But again, there's quite a lot of repetition. So once you've set up one, you almost copy-paste and just change a couple of values here. So as you can see, it has a type of typography. And then you have your value, which makes up your font family, your font size, which again uses the same object type as a dimension. So you have your value and your unit, and then your font weight and your line height. And then you can do that for all your different font sizes. And like here I have a different font family and stuff like that. So really nice. There is a bit of a challenge here in what both translation tools do. And I will talk about that in a second. Then borders. This is really cool. So instead of just, for example, so like here in Penpot, instead of just having this border radius large with a value of 40, you can actually define your entire border. So what I'm doing here is first just our border radius. So this is circular. So normally I'd make this 50%. Unfortunately, percentage is not allowed. You can do rem, m, pixel, and I think there's one other unit you can do. I can't remember now, but percentage is not one of them. So I just give it a really big RAM value, and it will also give you a circle. And then I have a large border radius and a medium border radius. And again, here I just use a type dimension, even because there isn't a type border radius, right? But then down here is our borders. And again, because color is a color object, I can reference another color from my colors. And the interesting thing is, as you'll notice here, even though I have in different files, it still works. Because basically what the translation tool would do is it would take all your individual files, make one big file, and now you basically have your references in place. So you can set the color of your border, you can set its width, and you can set its style. So you can set your full border. So we have a heavy border, a default border, again referencing a color, and a thin border. So really, really nice. And what did I change? Okay. And are those everything? Spacing, I think, is the other one. Yeah, so with spacing, as I mentioned, there isn't a type called spacing, but there's a type called dimension. And you can use that to set up your spacing, because now we can set a value and we can set a unit, which is critical. Like maybe you want to do it in pixels, maybe you actually want to do it in rems, which is the preferred way. Oftentimes your names would be something like, let's for example, so 0.375 times 16. So that's 6 pixels. So you might do something like size 6. And so now you get dash dash spacing dash size 6. So you can think in pixels, but the values are actually in rem. Depends on how you want to do it. I'm using kind of t-shirt sizes here because I don't have that many, and then I have like a separate section for section spacing, specifically for sections. Again, all of these just uses your value, which is basically your value in unit, and then your type of dimension. So that's how I set up all of my design tokens. Now I also have this file, as you know, it's just all of those files in one file. But right now we're going to go back here, and as you can see, I'm specifying each one individually. And so all I have to do now, so I first installed Terrazzo CLI and the Terrazzo plugin CSS, and that is so that I can do my config over here. But now I go to my terminal, and all I run is npx tz build. Boom, 94 tokens built. So now if we go to that empty index.css, whoa, there's a lot going on here. Okay, so let's walk through it. So here's our border radius. As you can see, our circular with 200 rem, our radius large, radius medium. Here you can see is our borders, our rem solid, and you can see it references those colors. Perfect. Here you'll see something interesting. So this is what Terrazzo does by default. So you give it a hex, it then uses this color function, and what it does in here, so let me go to the MDN page, because you may or may not have seen the color function before. Here it is. It's baseline newly available. If we go down to browser compatibility, it's actually been around for quite some time. But of course, if you need to be baseline widely available before you can use it, then maybe you would not be able to use this. And I'll show you what you can do about that in a second. But the color space is implicitly sRGB. But we have all these new like wide gamut color spaces and things like that. So maybe you don't actually want to use sRGB. And that is when you can use this color function to actually say that you're using display P3, for example. And there's a whole bunch of other things you can do with this color function. I will link it up in the description. So that's basically what it's doing here. So it's taking our hex and it's converting it to RGB, and then it's using the color function. It's explicitly setting our color space to sRGB, and then it's setting the value of our actual hex color. And so that's why this might look like, whoa, what the heck is going on? But here you can see the cool thing, color link default actually references our neutral color as we would expect it to. Interesting thing, style dictionary doesn't do that. It actually puts the value of color neutral 90 here. So whether that's a problem or not is kind of not that important, because at the end of the day, this is being automatically generated by a tool. So you don't have to maintain any of this. So whether it references another custom property or whether it just puts the value, it's probably not that big of a deal. But it's interesting to know about the differences here. And so that's all our colors. Now here's our gradient. And here's the thing. So right now, if we look at the specification, and we go to, I think it's in here. No. So then it would be in format. Gradient. There we go. And here you will see at the bottom. So here the question is being asked, is the current specification for gradient fit for purpose? And you can click through to this issue and it's still being discussed. Because the question they're asking is, should you also need to or be able to specify the type of gradient? So is it linear, radial, conical, and so forth? Because of course right now you would see this and you'd be like, oh, wait a minute, but shouldn't it say linear gradient, blah, blah, blah? Maybe. But you can actually use this custom property as is here and then just use it in whichever type of gradient you want to use it. For example, if we look at linear gradient and we go to this little code pen here, you'll see I have the box. And then if you have a look here, you'll see there's that exact value that I had from the tokens, and I just brought these two over with the color sRGB. And then I'm just doing a linear gradient to right, and I'm using my custom property right there, and we're getting the exact output that I was expecting. So, I think it would be nice to be able to specify that and just have it be linear gradient here. But I don't think it should be a requirement. I think it should be an optional thing. Like, you can specify the type of gradient. If you don't, you get this output. Cool. And then next thing is just all our spacing tokens. They're all here with our thingies. Now here is, again, one thing. So right now, what it's doing with our typography tokens, so if we go here, you can see it's kind of expanding all of them. So for each one, it's creating its own custom property. So default font family, default font family, default font size, default font weight, default line height, and then display font family, But you can, for example, see like there's quite a lot of them that's just duplicating now. Now, if you run that through Style Dictionary, you might get something that's more what you would have expected, which is essentially what you would use in the shorthand font property in CSS. So basically all of these chain together. So something like, let me think. So 1 rems, 1.5, 400, something to that effect is what you would get with Style Dictionary. However, there is a bug. I believe I still need to. I didn't find a bug, so I might have to file one. But there's a bug in that it outputs object with the square brackets, and if you've logged stuff to the console with JavaScript, you might have seen this before, and you know that it's just literally, it's an object and it's just printing the object to to the console. So basically, my suspicion is that Style Dictionary isn't expecting this font size value to be an object. It's expecting it to be a string, and therefore it's just outputting it, and instead of getting an actual value, it's outputting object. So right now, if you do this, it doesn't work, and you can work around that by doing this, by doing that, but that isn't according to the standard. So so now you're kind of in this like in-between world. It's like, okay, that'll give you more maybe what you want the custom property to be, but it doesn't follow the standard. Terrazzo might not give you exactly what you want in terms of the custom properties, but your JSON syntax follows the standard. And this is why I added this utility. So Terrazzo has actually got a couple of these. So let me just have a quick look. Where is it? Here we go. So if we go here, it has background, border, font, layout, shadow, text. And you can see I'm using font. And so basically what it's done now is it's created these utility classes. So I'm saying everything that is typography dot, treat it as fonts, and then it creates these utility classes. So if we go down, you'll see now we have this utility class that says font typography display. So if you add that onto something, now you're going to get a font family with this, a font size and a font weight and font height. So for example, if you use this like on an H1, then this is what you'll get. Now, it's up to you how useful this is. For a lot of people, this would be super. This is great. The other thing is that the slightly annoying thing about this is you're not getting these styles. For example, if you're just using an H1 with no class on it. So this means that whenever you use an H1, H2, H3, you won't get these default things. So oftentimes in your style sheet, you would do something like this, right? Where you would say either just an H1 or anything with the class font typography XXL will have these things. So And because this is regenerated, you don't really want to do that in here, because whenever you run again, it's going to blow away these additional things you've done. So it's a trade-off here, which way you want to go. Okay, but I think this is still really, really good, and it's a really good start. And again, like I said, I'm sticking with this tool for the reasons that I've mentioned. Now, let's say you can't use this. So you have to use hex. What do? You can still do this. What you do here is you say legacy hex true. Now, if we run it again, now if we go back, we have our hex values in here, right? Everything is, other than that, everything's the same. This references our custom properties that live here. Our link that's in here somewhere, link references our custom property, everything as before. Just now, instead of using the color function, it's just outputting our hex directly. So yeah, I think it's really cool. I'm looking forward to where the standard's going. I'm definitely going to keep using Terrazzo. I'm going to see if there's ways that I can maybe contribute to it, if their help is wanted, even if it's just through using it and filing issues like I did with the HSL thing. But yeah, it was quite the exploration, quite the deep dive. But now I have all my tokens inside my CSS. I'm going to be fine with using the color function, so I'll switch mine back to use that. But yeah, what do you think? Is this something you will use? Oh, important thing before I close out. Like, so what? Now I have my stuff in JSON. Now what? Well, the thing is, as I mentioned in the previous video, in case you didn't watch that one, you don't only have to generate CSS from that JSON. Let's say you're working on a team and maybe some of your team uses Sass. You can generate your CSS and your Sass from the same base JSON. Let's say you work on a team that uses CSS, Sass, and maybe you have a iOS team and they're using Swift. You can, again, from that same source, you can generate all this with the same tool, but just adding these integrations, as Terrazzo calls it. So that is one of the other big benefits, is you have this single data exchange format in JSON that you can then pass, and all the different teams can use it, and they can generate the tokens they need. Either just the tokens they need, or you can have a centralized place where this can happen. And of course, because it's a thing that is automatically built, you can even do this as part of your CI/CD pipeline. So a lot of possibilities here. I think it's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to see where this goes. If this is something that interests you, join the community group, have a look at the repository and the issues and pull requests that's happening there. Have a look at Terrazzo. Feel free to try the others. Yeah, and let me know what you think. Is this something that you're excited about using, something you've used before? Have you used something else? Yeah, give me your thoughts, feedback, ideas in the comments below. I will link up all the things in the description. And until the next one, keep making the web awesome and accessible, and have fun. Make awesome things for the web. Peace.